Oh man, she did what? Why is the government always lying? That's not your fault. That was your mother's job. I know it sucks. It's hard, but it's fair. If we don't get our heads out of our collective asses, we're gonna be lost in the sauce. You knew he was sorry when you met him at BHS. Come on, baby girl. What's the solution? Look, I know I'm fucked up.
Welcome to the Angry Nerd Podcast. My name is Arshawn Wade, aka the Angry Nerd. Tonight's show is brought to you in part by some bad life choices and a few shattered dreams. The Angry Nerd Podcast is sponsored by the money that my wife gives me from my SSI check, some chick named Joni, and proceeds from listeners like you. Now, if you want to be one of these listeners who contributes to the show getting better and better each week, scurry on over to Cash App, drop a couple of twos and fews, be much appreciated. Now I feel like a total doofus because I don't have my list of people who donated last week. I'm sorry, $ the Angry Nerd over there at Cash App. But I'm sorry, I don't have the list for you guys this week to shout you guys out, but I greatly appreciate everything that you guys do. But I said last week that I will be giving away a custom shirt this week, and I want to jump that off first thing for my listeners out there in Facebook land, because I love you guys. You guys give me somebody to interact with so it doesn't feel all weird while I'm talking into a mic sitting in my mom's basement. So without further ado, here it is. Let me show that design one more time again. And I'm so sorry for my friends on Podbean, Spotify, and YouTube who can't see this awesome design, but I will do my very best to describe it to you. Let me first put it up for my friends over here in Facebook. Boom. Now it may appear backwards, but what that actually says is Hustlenomics. You turn it around on the back and you see the wise owl with the pencil in his hand. It says class is always in session. Now, I'm gonna let you guys know in on a little secret of how I picked the person who would win. What I did was I hit the @ sign, and then I asked my girl to pick a number between 1 and 25, and the number that she picked was 17. And what I did is I counted to 17 until I stopped and landed on a name. And Mia Mine, where are you at, homegirl? You won this free t-shirt. I'm gonna inbox you later on and get your address and send this to you. So shout out to you. I hope you enjoy it. Please do me a favor and send me a picture of you or your boyfriend. It may be a little bit big, it's a large, and you're kind of small girls, so you may give this to your boyfriend. In either case, take a picture with the shirt, send it in to the show so that I can show our brothers and sisters out here on Facebook you rocking our gear. Okay? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, listen, because I've been chomping at the bit all week to get to this topic, I am going to forego our hot topics portion of the show, and we're going to jump right into tonight's main topic. Predators, starring Jada Pinkett-Smith. And before I jump into this topic, I do want to say first and foremost to Mr. August Alsina, I apologize because maybe I jumped the gun last week with my assessment of how you handled the entire situation when you were having the interview with Angela Yee. So let me say that I apologize to Mr. August Alsina because I jumped the gun. Now, back to what I was saying. Predators. And people say, Arshawn, how did you get a topic like predators based on the situation, the entanglement with August Alsina, Will Smith, and Jada Pinkett-Smith? I'll tell you how. Because see, after I got some more information, what I realized is that Will Smith would have been shot to pieces in the media had the shoe been on the other foot. If this was little Willow, his daughter's friend, that they brought into the house at a very young, impressionable age, and she was sick and they were supposed to be nursing her back to health, if the shoe was on that foot, Will Smith would be looked at like R. Kelly right now, demonized. We'd be canceling Will Smith right now. But are we really going to accept the fact that Jada Pinkett Smith groomed this young man, stole his innocence? Some would say that, Arshawn, he's not so innocent. I'll tell you what, when you have a substantially older woman like that, dealing with a young man who is 21, 22, 23 years of age, and you are well beyond your 40s, that's abuse. That is abuse. Now, there are some of us men, the reason why it's so bad and we can't take a stand for things like this is because we're the worst. We're the worst at chiding each other. We're the worst at ribbing each other, because if a man came forward and said that he was a victim, like this young brother was, because I think those were real tears that he shed when he talked to Angela Yee. And looking at it now and having all the information, I see that he was a victim of the Supreme Order. She victimized that young man. He already had failing health when he came there, and that was her son's friend. How did you find yourself in an entanglement of all things? Let me address the word entanglement real quick. That's where I would have dove across the red table. Everything that we just did and set up for publicity and try to jump out in front of this train, I would have messed it up when she said it. I'm Will Smith. I'm going to sit back like Will Smith and I'm going to say, so tell me what happened with you in August. Well, that's when I had got into an entanglement. Entanglement? Okay, she think I'm... And I would have came across the red table. That's me. That's just Arshawn being honest with who he is right now in his life. I would have came across the table. Entanglement, you're going to play games with me? You see, you insult my intelligence when you use words like entanglement. You slept with the kid. Sounds like quite a bit. And I don't think this would be such a big deal because I'm reading between the lines a little bit, and it appears that when they got back together, because everybody wants to, all the women who want to uphold Jada and her wrongdoing, they're doing on the auspice that they weren't together. Okay, but it appears that they had this conversation. Hey, were you dealing with anybody while we were split? And her answer was no, because this wouldn't have hit Will from the blind like that. Will looked visibly hurt. Will looked visibly bothered. For anybody who didn't see the red table talk, he did not look like his normal cheery Will Smith self. He looked like he had done some hard drinking and he had stayed up late at night crying over what this young man may or may not have done with his wife of 20 some odd years. And then the language that she used, it's been so long since I felt good. Wait a minute. Hey, y'all need to cut that out. You know what I mean? After the final edit came out, can y'all take that part out? Because if you'd have saw Will's face, oh, it was heartbreaking. But I digress. Let's get back to the topic, predator. You guys know how much the nerd loves his definitions. Before I get too deep, let me give you 3 definitions real fast. I want to define 1, the word predator and why I'm using it. 2, the word ruthlessly. And 3, I want to define sexual abuse. First is predator. Predator, as defined by Webster, is a person or group that ruthlessly exploits others. Now you see why I had to define ruthlessly, because it can be used in so many different ways. But the way they're using it here, ruthlessly, means without pity or compassion. And you think about how she exploited this young man for her selfish needs, the need to feel good, or whatever it is that she made herself believe, so that she could sleep at night knowing that she was sleeping with her son's friend. Okay. The third thing I want to define is sexual abuse. Excuse me. According to the CDC, and I am paraphrasing here the tiniest bit just for to condense it. The CDC defines sexual abuse as involvement in sexual activity that someone, 1, does not fully comprehend, 2, does not consent to, or is unable to give informed consent to, or is not developmentally prepared for and cannot give consent to. Furthermore, experiencing sexual abuse is an adverse experience that can affect how a person thinks, acts, and feels over a lifetime, resulting in short and long-term physical, mental, and emotional health issues. I want to let that simmer for just a second. Everybody in Facebook, I dropped the bomb. I can't wait till this production gets really good and y'all can hear the bombs and the claps and all that kind of snippety stuff. So I had to lay out those definitions for you so that I can give a little bit of context to what angle I'm coming from with this. Because now let me lay out a few facts for you. 1 in 4 men is sexually abused in his lifetime. And we don't like to talk about this, especially in the low-income communities. But some of the biggest predators, sexual predators in our communities are women. Why do they get to operate the way that they do? Because men don't come forward. What boy is going to come forward and say that he had sex with a teacher? And if he does, it will be in a braggadocious sort of way. It's not until a young man gets some therapy that he realizes that that was sexual trauma and this lady had no business doing any of that with you. It's something that we really don't talk about. But according to the CDC, 1 in 4 young men is sexually molested or raped in his lifetime. Those are big numbers, especially when the numbers in comparison to women's are 1 in 3. We all know about the trifles of a young lady living in the world as we know it today. We all know about Uncle Charlie and stuff like that. We all know about that. We all know about the R. Kellys of the world. Nobody's talking about the Jada Pinkett's of the world, though. Because this was a kid who trusted adults who came into their home and felt that he would be safe. Because mind you, while he was living in their home, he was sick. I forget the name of the disease that he suffers from, but it's very rare. And this young man was knocking on death's door when he came to live with them. So he came to live with them under the guise that he was going to get taken care of. Well, this young man got taken on a roller coaster ride by a vindictive, I don't care what anybody says, it's vindictive. Her attitude during the red table talk was dismissive and downright disrespectful, because she has been carrying this secret and this lie. I feel like personally, if they really wanted to do damage control, they would have not said anything. They would have just let the young man keep talking and everything, but there was too much truth. There was too much truth being displayed, and the young man, anybody who has dealt with a person who's been sexually abused, anybody who's been sexually abused themselves, will recognize the signs. That young man wasn't putting on for the cameras. He experienced trauma at the hands of this lady. And he may not articulate it that way, but that's what it is. And it isn't until you get therapy, it isn't until you start involving yourself in counseling or seeing a psychiatrist or something like that, that you understand as a man that you were sexually assaulted, that you were sexually abused. Well, men are taught to be strong and you know, not to be victims. To be a victim is to be less than a man. Not only do the women socialize us that way, but we also socialize one another that way. Because what man could you go to and say that I've been sexually assaulted? Who could he go to and say that to? The only reason he's speaking out about it now is because he's gotten to a place in his life, in his manhood, to where he feels confident. He feels strong enough to stand up and say what happened. Now, he's still not dealt with the trauma because he's framing it as if they had a relationship, and they did not. He was taken advantage of. And let me tell you something, these predators are all among us. And I'll tell you this. This is me. I'm going to share some of my personal information. I'm also going to share some of my friends have shared with me, but I will not say their names because everybody is at different places in their lives, and not everyone is ready to have their truth, bunny ears on that, exposed. But I will say this. My first 5 sexual experiences, I was under the age of 10, and the young lady was at 16 years or older. Let that simmer on you real quick. And I thought that I used false male bravado as a way of coping and dealing with it, as many of us do. And after talking with friends and realizing that I can name 5 friends off the top of my head who have had similar experiences with babysitters, with girls at camp, and it's always someone who is significantly older. I talked to enough of my friends and they would take that most of their sexual exploits, it was the young lady who initiated them. And that's been my case as well. Now, here's where the game gets murky, because the first thing that women want to say, I was actually waiting for somebody to put it in the comments. First thing that women would like to say, well, she must have been sexually abused too. Yeah. That's terrible. Well, let's stick to our trauma right now. Right now, we're talking about she has turned from victim to victimizer. And it becomes the next step in the progression. Victimizing, because it is seen as normal. It's seen as normal because, well, nobody took me to counseling. Well, nobody came and talked to me and sat me down and explained to me what happened and how this was wrong. So it's very easy for the next step in that progression to become sexually abusers. So this is where I'm going with that. A lot of women, especially in the low-income communities, will speak about men and the way that they treat them. Well, the numbers are pretty high, 1 in 4. Then we talk about 25 out of 100 and so on and so forth. That's a big number. That's a quarter of the male. That's what that breaks down to. A quarter of the male population has been sexually abused. Let that sink in for a second. A quarter of the male population, according to statistics, we know this isn't a 100% ironclad number. It could be greater or it could be less. But roughly a quarter of the male population, typically these numbers exponentially increase when we talk about the low-income communities. These numbers increase to more of like 2 and 4, which would be half. So if we look at that, we would say half of the men who live in the low-income communities where a lot of these complaints come from, that men ain't this and men aren't that, men don't treat women this way, they don't treat women that way. Well, if half of the men in your community have been abused by a woman who should have been taking care of or loving or nurturing that young man, what do you think his experience is going to be later on in life when he's a man and he has power and he has physical power, he has means, he has money, or he has influence? What do you think his interactions are going to be with women thus forward? Now, I know there's a whole lot of macho men and they ain't gonna say, hey, I was a victim too. Nobody wants to put that. Women, it's easy. Women are encouraged to tell their truth. Women are encouraged to say, hey, I was a victim and confront the victimizer. It's not the same for men. It's just not. It just isn't. And it isn't until you seek some sort of counseling or you seek some sort of therapy that you actually start to see the situation for what it is. Because I don't think Mr. August Alsina still sees himself as a victim. I don't think that he does. I think that he's on the right train, but he's on the wrong track because he's still referring to it as a relationship. And many, many years ago, when I was a young man working in a factory, there was a woman who was close to 60, but she was a very, very attractive woman at her age. And man, I would buy her stuff out of the vending machine. I would sit by her at lunch. I would take her trash out by her workstation. I just wanted to be around this lady because sooner or later, she was going to be my girlfriend. I love this lady. And one day I just finally said, what am I doing wrong? I've held the door. I've been a gentleman. And she said, you've done everything right, except be 30 years older. She said, sweetheart, if a woman of my age would deal with a young man your age, that's the first sign that she's not a good woman. I have grandchildren that are older than you. What does that look like when I show up to the family reunion or if I show up to the family function with you and you're younger than my grandkids? It's just not good. It's not the way things are supposed to be. I have to teach you everything you need to learn to be a man. I was 18 at the time, mind you, and she was 59 or 60 maybe, somewhere in that area. And she let me down so gracefully, but that always stuck with me. That always stuck with me, that if a woman of that caliber dealt with me as if we were on the level in that capacity, that was always an indicator to me that I'm not dealing with a very quality woman right here. So that stuck with me, and I really believe that. Being that I've lived a little bit of life now, and I understand psychologically, physically, spiritually, mentally, just not on the same level. You know what I mean? You're not on the same level as that person. And the elder person in that situation will typically control that situation. They will typically manipulate everything that's going to happen, everything that's happening. And it's just not a very good situation. You know, and like I said, this young man was victimized. And nobody's saying anything about it. I'm not hearing people use terms like predator, because she did something. Maybe he was legally of age, but this is something that's very similar to what we canceled R. Kelly for. I rode down the street listening to Bump and Grind, and people were looking at me like I was crazy. And I said, oh, I forgot. You can't listen to R. Kelly. So are we going to watch Gotham? I think they killed Fish Mooney off the show anyway, but still, we should be canceling Jada Pinkett, who sleeps with their kid's friend. Let's look at things at their rawest, most granular level. That was her kid's friend, and she apparently, I don't really know how you define the word entanglement. I think that she had a relationship with her son's friend, her son's sick friend, whom she was supposed to be taking care of and helping get back in good health. And I think it's wrong. And I think that sexual abuse is something that needs to be talked about. And I think that men should feel comfortable being able to speak on these things. What I want you to do, especially for my female listeners, what I want you to do is create a space for your significant other, for your sons, your cousins, your brothers, all the men who happen to be in your life, who you've been blessed to be around. I want you to make a space for them to open up and say some of these things to you. And you will see that the things that I'm saying to you aren't foreign. They aren't just that far-fetched. They just aren't. You will find out that these occurrences are very common. And you will start looking at your friends, and you will start looking at your neighbors differently, because you will start to realize that there are women who are predators among us, and they are allowed to be around. They are allowed to babysit. They are allowed to be left alone with these children. And I will tell you, some of the situations that I was in when I was a youngster, my parents, they weren't bad people. They were on the scene. We were around people who were supposed to be trustworthy. So you just never know. But you have to make a space for young men to be able to come and say, hey, this happened. Hey, something happened that I didn't like. I don't really know how to explain it, but I think something wrong happened. Because a lot of times the first thing we'll say to a little boy who shows up crying is, hey, stop crying. That's the first thing that we'll say to a little boy. And what does he do after he's been in a situation like this? Turns inwardly. How many women deal with a man who they can't get to talk? Huh? I know I be into it. My girls, I can't read your mind. You got to say something. It's a very bad habit. But you're so used to internalizing problems. You're so used to internalizing trauma, because there is no space for us to be able to exercise these things. That's why I say on the mental health side of the game, women have it much better than men because they are allowed to sit around and drink wine and talk about their problems. We don't typically socialize that way. Some of the more enlightened of us, we do have a social circle where we can call and shed a tear with a brother. But typically, the average guy, especially from the low-income communities, does not have that space. He doesn't have a place where he can go and be vulnerable. He doesn't have a group of men that he can call and be vulnerable with. He doesn't have a support system that can where he can come and just break down. He doesn't have that. I thank God in heaven or wherever he may be. I ain't gonna start talking about religion. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But I thank God that I do have people around like that. I thank God that I do have people who I can lean on. And if I need to have one of those breakdowns because, man, I don't know how I'm going to do this and I don't know how I'm going to do that. I got all these irons in the fire. How am I going to prioritize? I'm glad that I have been blessed with relationships and with good, solid brothers that I can call and lean on, that I can call and break down to, that I can call and share intimate things with. But that is not the norm. I do not speak as if the situation is the same for everybody. The situation that I have, that God has blessed me with, is not the rule. It is the exception. Black Twitter, Black Facebook, out of pocket. Way out of pocket. You know how many memes I've seen with Will Smith looking like he's crying or making fun of him? And that's the problem. That's the problem right there, because if the shoe was on the other foot, if Will was knocking off Lil Willow's homegirl while they were on a break, if he got into an entanglement with a young lady who was his daughter's friend, he'd be demonized. Jada would be walking away with half of their estate and spousal support, punitive damages. They'd have figured out a couple of other reasons that they could give her some more money and try to ruin him. So when I see all the little memes on Facebook and I see all the posts on Twitter and stuff like that, typically coming from women, and a lot of women were being very disrespectful. And then we turn around and look at a movement like Me Too. How about us too? Us too. Let's hijack their movement. Because let me tell you this, good brother. Let me tell you this, good brother. We are damaged as men, as leaders. Socially, they're already giving over the reins to our family, to the system, to the welfare system, to the HUD, to the food stamps. They're already giving over the reins of our family to the system. We need to heal. That's what we need to do. We need to work on getting ourselves together. And it starts by identifying the problem. Identifying the fact that I was traumatized too. Identifying the fact that you weren't the coolest dude in school because you were sleeping with a 22-year-old girl and you were 14. You were being sexually assaulted, regardless of how good it may or may not have felt. You were a victim that ladies had no business dealing with you that way. You were a kid. And just like a creepy uncle who steals the innocence of a little girl, these trifling aunties that do the same, they're doing the exact same thing to our little boys. But they're never called to the carpet. These numbers that the CDC came up, they didn't just pull them out of their tail. These are real numbers. Have some conversations. If you got a son between the ages of 8 and 14, you might need to have a conversation with him. You might need to have a conversation with him. Because I got a couple of friends who will remain nameless. And I'll say they'll remain nameless because I see people watching right now that know these friends and they might know the stories. But they were knocking off teachers when we were in junior high, high school. That's not a badge of honor, homie. That's a traumatic experience. And you laugh with the boys and you dap and you high five as a way of coping with the trauma. But you know what it does to you when you see that I'm 14 years old and this grown woman will get into bed with me? What do you think my opinion of women is after that? I think Snoop Dogg said it back in 92, 93. They ain't this, but that's and those. Y'all can fill in the blanks. That's where that mentality comes from. I have a nagging suspicion that if we sit down and have a conversation with Uncle Snoop, that may be where he adopted that mentality from. A place of trauma. And he was able to channel it in his music. That may be where Too Short got the word biatch. Where does that come from? That comes from trauma. All we have to do is look at our people in the low-income communities, and you can see how we deal with trauma. Because our excuses in the past have been, we don't have money for a psychiatrist. We don't have money to see a psychologist. Just go see a shrink. I ain't taking no pills. I know that's the first thing. That's the first thing out of my mom, my grandmother. That's the first thing out of them. I ain't finna take their pills now. You know, and that shuts everything down. So I ain't going to talk to them either because I know what goes with those conversations. Pills come with those conversations. And a lot of us are scared of those pills. But will we let that fear give birth to the next generation of men who live through trauma and go on the rest of their lives fractions of the men that they could have been? At what point do we say, listen, it didn't work back then. It ain't really working that good now. Let me try something different with this new generation. Now, I will tell you from personal experience, because a little boy crying is one of my pet peeves. But it's because the way I was socialized and the way I was conditioned. You don't cry. Little boys don't cry. Little girls cry. Suck it up, homie. And it's different. But to allow your son to go through the gamut of emotions that is normal for a human being. That's what we have to do. Because that's how he develops the emotional barometer. That's how he develops the emotional intelligence. That's how he develops the courage to say, hey, that's not right. Hey, what are you doing? Don't touch that. Let that go. Get your hands off of me. Personally, I don't know if it's right. I just know it's a way to defend yourself. I encourage my kids to curse. And if you're in a situation where an adult does something that is offhand, that's the first thing I want you to say is get your GD hands off of me as loud as you can. Because a little kid's voice saying curse words is going to get every adult in the vicinity's attention. That's my thought process behind it. Because the first thing you need to know is you don't have to listen to every adult. There are certain adults that I trust that I will give authority over you as if when they speak, it's like I speak. And there are very few of those. Yes, talk back to them. You don't have to respect every adult. That's the breeding ground for the sexual abuse that takes place every day in this country with our young men. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Compliant little automatons. No, give a little bit of kickback. Why? I think our generation is that first generation of why kids, why this, why that. That's why a lot of us don't go to church now because we got too many questions. And they like, look, y'all need to get out of here with your questions. Because I don't know. Because we didn't answer that. We didn't ask those questions when I was growing up. We didn't question the Lord. We just went to church. Encourage your kids. Empower them Because what you don't want to have happen is for your son to be a young man snatched in the clutches of one of these sexual predators who's parading around as Aunt so-and-so, Miss so-and-so. Because when we think about sexual abuse and sexual predators, we think of some creepy old man with liver-spotted hands touching little boys and little girls. That ain't always the case. Look on Facebook, you'll see some of these videos of these young ladies twerking their behinds in little boys' faces thinking that it's cute. She's a creep. If we're gonna call R. Kelly a creep, these heifers gotta be creeps too. And we have to carry it like that. We want to talk about equality. Let me tell you something. That is a process that is universal to everybody. Creeps come in all shapes, forms, and fashions. And we have to protect our sons from these creeps out here in lace fronts. These creeps out here who wear nightgowns. Come sleep in the bed with me, little man. These creeps. The most horrible movie ever made in the history of movies was Precious. But how many of you know that that situation happens to little boys too? Was it Antoine Fisher or Losing Isaiah? It was Antoine Fisher, I think, where he had the weird auntie who was doing things to him. That wasn't just a movie sitting for dramatic effect. No, that's reality. Regardless to whether people want to admit it, whether people want to realize it or not, you need to create a space where your sons and your little cousins and your nephews can come to you. Because I promise you, there's nobody for them to come to. There's nobody for them to come to and feel comfortable sharing stuff like that with. And a lot of us carry it on into adulthood, and we'll talk about it, and it won't be until 30 years later that you realize that wasn't right. And something was wrong with that heifer. And you can save some little boy a lifetime of ruined relationships and a lifetime of shame and guilt and remorse by creating a space where he can come and be safe. By creating a space where he can come and be vulnerable. By letting him know that it's okay to feel like that. It's okay to tell somebody, nah, ride out. I don't rock like that. It's okay to say that. It's okay to tell an adult, nah, you weird, get away from me. I don't like the way I feel when I'm around you, kick rocks. You can save some little boy a lifetime of hurt and pain. Now, for those of us who only think in mono and they can't, think in stereo, as the good brother Zoe Williams would say, that's not to diminish the process of sexual molestation or rape that goes on with young ladies. What I'm saying is there's a lane for them. There are counselors at schools. There are people in the church. There's crisis hotlines. And yes, you can argue that young men could use these same avenues. What I'm saying is the space hasn't been created for young men. That hotline is geared towards women. These things aren't cool for young men to come and say, hey, I was victimized. Somebody touched me. Someone did something inappropriate with me. Because if it was common, we wouldn't find this situation happening with the young brother August Alsina, who appears to not be doing great on the mental, emotional side of the game. Doesn't appear to be doing great. But he grew, because one of the most noteworthy things that I took away from that interview that August Alsina had with Angela Yee was he broke it off with her. He recognized, this is gonna kill me. If I keep dealing with this lady, it's gonna kill me. And he broke it off with her. I want to leave you guys with this. Reach out to your brothers. Reach out to your cousins. They're 25, 35, 45 years of age now. There's nothing that we can do to change what's happened already. But what we can do is compile some information so that we can do better with the next generation. Because if you start having this conversation with some of the men in your family, like I had with my stepdad, and he shared some things with me, blew my mind, because I thought it was just me. When I opened up this conversation to some friends, and 3 of the 5 said, "Dang, homie, I thought it was just me." Then we can start to develop a web of healing through these connections, through these conversations. So, Arshawn, why are you saying women? Women create this space. Women reach out. Because it's going to be a little bit easier to share this trauma with a woman than it is to share with your boys. A lot of men, because like I said, the numbers are really high. A lot of men aren't that emotionally intelligent. We just aren't. We're working on it. We're reading the books. And Iyanla Vanzant, you know what I mean? We watch the shows. We're trying. But the initial reaction when you share this with your friends, especially when you guys come from the low-income communities, is, "Ah!" I don't know. We're horrible like that to each other. But our first instinct is to roast. So that's why I encourage the real women in our communities to create these spaces. Because we need to heal from the trauma of a woman. And personally, I believe that it takes the genuine love, care, and concern of a real woman to help the young man heal from the trauma of the predator. I hope that makes sense. And I hope that somebody got something out of this, because I think it's terrible what they're doing to Will Smith in the media right now. I think, mostly I see it on Black Twitter and Black Facebook. And I think it's horrible. And like I said, I think it's because of all the trauma that has gone on in our communities. So let's work on getting some healing done. I love you guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're on Facebook, somebody holler at my girl Mia Mine. I will jump in that inbox and let you know that you were the winner of. Let me show y'all this one more time. I'm mostly showing y'all because I'm quite proud of it. That's it, baby. Hustlenomics. My name is Arshawn Wade, aka The Angry Nerd, and I'm saying peace out.